Thanks, Melinda. Should we go ahead and share our screen?
Sure.
Great. Is everybody able to see this?
Looks good.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Melinda, for putting this group together, and thanks everybody for attending. Really nice to see that we've got a large group today. Looking forward to hearing introductions from everybody. Just to quickly get started, I think we can start with the VIA team introducing ourselves, and then we have a couple of prompts for our stakeholders to go around and introduce themselves. But to start things off, my name is Webb Faribault. I'm a transit planning consultant with VIA. I've been with VIA for about 4 years and have worked on a number of microtransit planning projects similar to this, including several projects in Vermont. So I've worked with the communities of Manchester, of Bennington, and of Barrie, and we'll soon be working with GMT on a project in St. Albans. And the broader VIA organization has a lot of experience working with communities in Vermont, so we're very excited to be working with Williston as well. But I will hand it off to my colleagues, Cahal and Peter, to also introduce themselves.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Cahal. I'm a director at VIA. And like Webb, I've worked on a lot of microtransit planning studies in the region. So I kind of supported 12 different studies with VTrans across Vermont. I just wrapped up a project in Keene, New Hampshire, and a few others in the area. And so, yeah, really looking forward to working with you and hearing your vision and your goals and things for microtransit. I'll hand it over to Peter.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Vida. I'm also a transit planning consultant at VIA. And like the other folks on my team, I've done a couple projects in Vermont. I've helped out the communities of Rutland and then Tri-Valley Transit in the Randolph, Vermont area. Also very much looking forward to hearing your feedback about the project today.
Excellent. And just to provide just a quick comment on our other experience, as we've mentioned, we have a lot of experience working in Vermont and in New England, but we also have experience designing microtransit services across the world. And I think generally we've kind of developed a specialization in working with lower density communities who are looking for innovative ways to provide local service and also connecting to regional fixed route services, kind of similar to Williston. So again, we're really looking forward to working on this project and hearing from everyone. So for introductions, we would love to hear everybody's name. We'd like to hear the organization or the community you're representing as a member of this committee. And then we'd also appreciate if everybody could share one hope for what they'd like to see in Williston in terms of transportation, or something that you'd like to see achieved through this study. So I'm happy to kind of just go down my sidebar and maybe call on names in the order that I see them appear. The first two names on my sidebar are Matt and Melinda. So Matt and Melinda, would you guys mind getting us started?
Sure, I can jump in. My name is Matt Belanger. I'm the planning director here in Williston. And my hope for transportation in Williston is that it can continue to enhance the connection between these very diverse parts of the town, from our rural agricultural recreational area all the way into our town center at Taft Corners and everything in between.
My name is Melinda Scott, and I'm the Energy and Community Development Planner of the town of Williston. And my hope for transportation is that people who don't wish to drive and people with no means to drive have other opportunities to get around Williston.
Thanks, Matt and Melinda. And I should mention that we have been working closely with Matt and Melinda on the study, and they are administering the project on Williston's end. And the next name I'm seeing is Adam.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Adam Lawrence. I'm the executive director at Special Services Transportation Agency. We're the current demand response paratransit provider for Chittenden County. I would say that my hope for Williston would be to continue to fill gaps in transportation and ensure that there's transportation methods and programs available for all residents in the area.
Cool. Kathy Ann.
Guys, so I'm Kathy Ann LaRose. During the day, I'm a planning and zoning director. I think that's why it says Town of Colchester, but I think I'm here as a resident of Williston. I joined Matt and Melinda and some other people in doing some work on the official map some couple of years ago. So I'm excited to talk here mostly as a resident.
Great, thank you. Next name I see is Marshall.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marshall Distel, and I'm a transportation planner with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. I'm really excited for this study. And I guess my primary hope for transportation in Williston is that we can just enhance mobility for all.
Thank you. Jamie.
Hi, everyone. Jamie Smith. I'm the Director of Planning and Marketing for Green Mountain Transit. And I'm a firm believer that, we can fill a lot of gaps with microtransit. We were the first provider in the state to have a microtransit project in Montpelier. And we were the former fixed route provider of service in the village of Williston. We still have service in Williston. So I'm just really excited to see how microtransit and our fixed route service can kind of expand commuting options for folks in the town of Williston.
Thanks, Jamie. Jen.
I'm Jen Townley, and I'm representing, I'm part of a group called Developmental Disabilities Housing Initiative, and I'm representing those with disabilities and their ability to access either anywhere within town, I guess, because many of them are non-drivers and many of them have parents that are guardians for their children. But I'm going to advocate for all with disabilities. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Alpert. I'm representing Cathedral Square. I'm the SASH coordinator over here at Whitney Hill Homestead in Williston. And I would just hoping that we can continue to provide the transportation that we do and make it affordable for everyone, affordable and accessible for everybody.
Thanks, Beth. Chris.
Hi, everyone. Chris Demiani, Senior Transit Planner at Green Mountain Transit. I'm hopeful to see how microtransit can help provide an adaptable transportation model to the ever-growing Williston.
Thanks, Chris. Amy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Brewer. I'm a Williston resident. I'm also Williston's commissioner to the Green Mountain Transit Board of Commissioners. And my hope for transportation in Williston is that it is connected, it is easy, and is accessible for everyone all year round. Thanks.
Thank you. Jim. Jim, I think you're on mute.
Well, let's take two. Yep, I am Jim McCullough. I am here as a Williston citizen, of veteran, if you will, of many transportation studies for the town of Williston over the past probably 50 years, and former CCTA back in the day, commissioner for the town, and I think I'm sharing pretty much the same hope that most people have from Williston have shared, but to put maybe a fine point on it, I would like to see the town of Williston be able to duplicate the SSTA type of service for the town of Williston for all citizens who are mobility challenged. That is to say, don't even have a car. We'll call that mobility challenged, and don't have a bike or don't know how to ride it. So that would be my hope.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for sharing those thoughts. And then last we have Dan Courier from Featurans.
Hello, everyone. This is Dan Courier, Agency of Transportation, Public Transit Coordinator. And I've actually been working with transit agencies across the state to both study and implement microtransit services. And so just really looking forward to, how this service might be complementary to other microtransit services in Vermont, and how we can learn from it, because we definitely want to expand microtransit as an option across the state where it's appropriate. And so, but looking forward to this discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. And I think that is everyone. Please, though, let me know if there's anybody who I've missed. Okay. So in terms of our agenda for today, we wanted to provide a quick overview of how we will approach this project, provide just some high-level information about the process we will follow. And then we have completed already some work for this project. We've done some existing conditions analysis, both on demographics within the town of Williston, and then also on existing transportation patterns and transportation services. But I think our kind of key point for this meeting is to have some discussion at the end to help shape how we approach this study. So to talk through our schedule and how we're approaching this project, we're starting with an existing conditions analysis where we look at socioeconomic and demographic data in the town. We've also looked at existing transportation services. But I think importantly, we are really hoping to learn a lot from our conversations with stakeholders, both in this stakeholder committee meeting, but also then in one-on-one conversations.
We may have lost Webb. Is everyone else unable to hear him as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't hear.
Muted on my end.
Okay, well, Webb will probably be reconnecting, but in the meantime, I think I carry on with his presentation. So we may lose the slides, unfortunately. The third task, as Webb was saying, is really we are planning on doing some one-on-one stakeholder interviews to really kind of have very detailed discussions on the different communities that some of you represent, and then using that information to make sure that any recommendations that we develop are kind of tailored to the local needs. I am just going to pull up the slides, so if you just need one moment. Is everyone able to see the slides again?
Yes.
So once we kind of finish building our understanding of the current situation, we'll basically develop a list of service alternatives. And so they are often thought of as zones, so different areas that you can travel for microtransit, but there can be other changes as well. So one alternative might have certain travel rules. You can only go to or from a certain location. And one alternative might be a long service hours, and one might be shorter service hours, or one might be including weekends. There's a lot of different ways we can think about alternatives. We'll develop a range of them, and then we'll actually run simulations to work out, based on the inputs that we've determined for each alternative, how many vehicles would we need on the road at peak times, at off-peak times, how many drivers, what's our expected daily ridership, weekly ridership, annual ridership, and what are we targeting in terms of wait times and average walks and things like that. And then out of that, essentially, we can come back and say, for this alternative, you need a budget of $700,000 per year. It's going to be 4 vehicles with an estimated ridership of X. And so we can give very concrete, specific recommendations using that simulation tool. And then kind of afterwards, we'll, with, of course, your involvement, we will then look at those alternatives backed up with the data and essentially decide which one seems most promising and give you all the information that you need to decide whether or not to proceed and launch a microtransit service, or whether you actually think maybe it's not as promising as you thought and there's a better alternative, maybe a local bus route or something like that. So we'll hopefully give you all the information that you need to decide whether this is a good idea for Williston or not. Any questions on the project schedule? And just to, sorry, I didn't really cover the dates, but all that's hopefully going to be wrapped up by June. So pretty tight timeline. All right, we still don't have web, so I'm going to talk through. Sorry, go ahead, Peter. Were you going to add something, or are you going to present these?
I am happy to do whatever is helpful. So Webb is, unfortunately, his internet went out. He's rejoining as quickly as possible. But if you want, Cahal, I can walk through these slides in a little bit more detail.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Cahal gave a really good overview of sort of the various steps of the process. And we have a couple of slides up just talking in a little bit more detail about some of the things we'll be looking at and sort of inputs we'll be taking in for each of these tasks. And so the first one is this existing conditions analysis, which we have completed. So we'll be sort of showing the results from that today and hopefully using that to spark some discussion. But this sort of process consists of, two halves. So there's a half kind of looking at the demographic characteristics, so population density, where people are commuting to, sort of what percentages and clusters of priority populations, folks with disabilities, folks who aren't able to drive, sort of where they are living within the town. And we also look at some of the existing transit. So in this case, it's SSTA for paratransit, and then 2 of the Green Mountain Transit routes that serve the town. And as part of this, we'll also be looking at some sort of key travel generators just to get an idea of common destinations people are looking to go to. Yes, and for
it does look like we have web back as well. I'm not sure if either you or web wants to keep going.
Peter, keep going. Sorry for the interruption, everybody. Wi-Fi just disconnected mid-sentence there.
No, not a problem. Webb, if you want to take it over after this one, I'm happy to hand it back to you, or I can keep going. But for task 3, for stakeholder engagement, that's what we're basically kicking off today. So we've delivered an engagement plan and talked through it with the town. We will have a couple of stakeholder meetings that we're trying to, involve you all at different stages in the project. So this is sort of the initial kickoff of here's what we've done so far, here's what we're looking to evaluate, and then, like Cahal mentioned, we'll be sort of coming back once we have zone ideas and simulation results and sort of some more information to decide which of the alternatives might make the most sense for Williston.
It's probably worth also mentioning there will be a survey that we're going to be doing to kind of gather input from the general public as well.
Yes, and then for task 4, developing service alternatives, this is again something we touched on just a little bit, but for each alternative we'll typically end up with a zone size, so sort of which destinations are included. This is just the area that you are able to book trips in as a rider, and develop demand estimates for that. And demand can be tricky to predict, especially in sort of a smaller zone. So we'll have low, medium, and high estimates for sort of daily ridership and then for annual ridership. And all of this, of course, will be based on the results of our existing conditions analysis. So information about all the population density, commute patterns, that all gets factored into the alternative design, along with ridership of existing services, sort of everything, in the project building up to this point will be factored in here. Yes, and then finally for task 5, this is, pulling forward a couple of the alternatives that we developed in the last task and actually going through and simulating them. So if you look on the right side of the slide here, you can sort of see the little blue and orange dots with vehicles traveling between them. This is a look at the tool that we use to actually calculate, number of vehicles that we need, service design parameters, getting into some of the nuts and bolts of how this service would actually work. And with the results of this, we'll be able to generate a cost estimate for each of these alternatives. And then finally for task 6, this will just be summarizing, all of the results that we've gotten to at this point into, a final report, something that's easy to digest, but we'll capture everything from the alternatives we looked at, the ridership estimated for each alternative, the service performance, cost, quality of service, all of these kind of characteristics that we've been building towards estimating through the project. And we'll also pair that with some information on implementation, just to actually, guide this from a study to something that's actually on the ground and operating. Perfect. Webb, do you want to take some of the existing conditions, or do you want me to keep going? I'm happy either way.
Peter, if you could keep going through the demographics, that would be great.
Perfect. All right, that sounds good. You're stuck with me for a few more slides, everyone. I'm sorry about that. But For the existing conditions analysis, like I mentioned, we have sort of two sides of it. So we have a demographics piece and a transit piece. So for demographics, some of our key findings, just looking at the data, are that Williston has grown significantly over the last 10 years, and a lot of that growth is concentrated in the Taft's Corners area. That's where you see a lot more intense housing development. A lot of the newer housing and business development is all sort of coming into that specific area of the towns. There's a sort of true town center developing. Another sort of interesting finding is that about 1 in 3 of the households in Williston are what we would call either car light, which means one car per family, or car free, so 0 cars per family. And in a lot of cases, these are riders who are these might be our potential sort of customers for a microtransit service, because they could have trips that are occurring at different times, going to different places, and would certainly benefit from having another way of getting around aside from a car. The other finding, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, is that there's just a significant overlap of commuting between Williston and Burlington. So there are a lot of Williston residents who are commuting west towards the lake, and then there are a lot of residents who are sort of from all the surrounding communities who are commuting into Williston for work. And then as far as the transit options, a couple sort of findings we wanted to highlight is that there is currently a strong fixed route service between Taft's Corners and sort of the downtown Burlington and downtown Essex area. There was previously a local route that sort of circulated through the downtown area where the town hall is, through Williston, but that's no longer operating. And there's also a demand response option available. So that's the SSTA service, and that's restricted specifically to people who qualify. And then there's also most of the demand response trips are to or from Burlington, not necessarily trips within Williston. So most people are sort of leaving the town to go somewhere else on the trips. Yeah, so I wanted to take a second just to highlight some of the existing conditions pieces in a little bit more detail. So for population density, you can really see on this map the development is happening around Taft Corners. So in this map, anywhere that's a darker red obviously is a higher population density. And so you do see that strong cluster. So the 2 gray lines, one going sort of north out of town and one going west out of town, are the 2 bus routes. And you see that those routes are serving the area that really does have a higher population density. And overall, the town of Williston is growing relatively quickly. It's home to about 10,000 residents now, and that's doubled in the last 30 years. And this is kind of a sample of some of the points of interest we're looking at. So I know that there are a few that we discussed in the last meeting that I don't think made it onto this slide, so we are adding those still. But this is an example of the types of destinations that we're looking at when we think about planning one of these zones. And Webb will talk about it a little bit more later, but microtransit, instead of being based on a specific set of predetermined routes and predetermined stops, we're really thinking about a zone here. So this zone could be the town of Williston, it could be a portion of it, it could be parts outside and inside the town, and anywhere in those zones are areas where a rider is able to book a trip for pickup and drop off. So when we plan these zones, it's always really important to have several sort of key destinations, right? Places people want to go frequently or they're able to use to connect to other places. And so this is an example of what we're looking at. So we have some hospital over here just west of town. We have the major grocery stores. We have some of the larger retirement homes and senior center developments. We have the library, the train station in Essex Junction. And some of those types of destinations are what we're going to be looking at. And each zone should include several of those. Perfect. And the last 2 slides for the demographics half of this existing conditions are just a snapshot of where people work. So this map is showing where people who live in Williston are commuting for work. And what we found is that there's actually more residents who commute into Burlington than folks who actually live and work in Williston. So we have a little bit more than 1,100 people who are commuting into the city of Burlington, about 900 who are staying in Williston, and a lot of the other communities kind of to the north and west. So South Burlington and Essex both come up pretty clearly in this data. Anywhere on the map that's a darker color is sort of a stronger, larger concentration of workers. So you can see a lot of folks kind of working along this I-89 corridor and then in the downtown Burlington area. And it's worth noting again, that the 80% of residents who are working are commuting, outside the town somewhere. And this data set is really helpful at sort of seeing the overall travel patterns. But I think it's important to, understand that these are only commuters, right? So there's a lot of people who either aren't in the labor force or are retired, or for some reason, this is not, their day-to-day commute. So this is helpful, but it's certainly not the complete picture of who might be taking microtransit. And this last map shows basically the opposite of what we just looked at. So these are for people who work in Williston. These are where they live. And you see sort of a similar, but slightly different pattern. 90% of the jobs in Williston are filled by non-residents. The single jurisdiction where the largest number of people are coming from is the town of Essex. The city of Burlington also has a high number of residents. And again, South Burlington and Colchester also show up. So you do see these, this to me looks a little bit more sort of dispersed than the last one, which is sort of makes sense because, home locations are sort of typically a little bit more spread out than business locations, which are typically clustered in sort of a few, downtown districts or shopping centers or things like that. But again, yeah, the point here, about 90% of people are coming from outside the town.
So picking up on the transit analysis, we looked at two categories of service, fixed route services, which are shown on the map here, which I think Peter introduced earlier. So the first route is the Williston route, which goes into central Burlington. And this provides a really frequent service with 20-minute headways for most of the day between downtown and Taft Corners. And then the 10 Williston Essex combo provides service from Taft Corners into and around Essex Junction. This service is less frequent than the Williston to Burlington route. It typically has a frequency of a little bit over an hour. Before 2020, GMT offered a local route in Oh, sorry, somebody was speaking. I will keep going, but there are some people on this call who have a lot of context on these services. So anybody, please feel free to chime in with other information about these services if there's anything I'm missing. But prior to 2020, the local route did serve Williston Center, and there was a separate route also in Essex Junction. On the next slide, we've tracked ridership over time. So the Route 1 has significantly higher ridership, and I think Jamie and Chris actually mentioned this is typically the top performing route in GMT's system in Burlington. So Route 1 does about 40,000 trips per month, while Route 10 does about 3,000 trips per month. One measure of service efficiency or productivity that we look at is the number of passengers per vehicle hour that a service will transport. So for Route 1, this is typically over 25 passengers per vehicle hour. And for Route 10, it's typically between 10 and 15. So generally, we would consider this to be a pretty strong level of productivity. And we think that microtransit is a candidate for adding local service that can connect to these routes rather than replacing the service that is offered by these routes. And we also wanted to note that both of these routes have recovered from COVID drops in ridership pretty impressively. So you can see on the top, the solid green line is 2023. And the dotted green line is 2019. So I think that's a pretty impressive result. And then similar for the Route 10, the orange solid line compared to the yellow dashed line. And then these two gray lines are services that have been suspended or combined into the Route 10, providing service between Williston and Essex. We also looked at demand response services provided in the town. So there's a couple of categories of service, which we know is provided both by GMT and by the Special Services Transportation Agency, which is a nonprofit providing specialized transportation. And we looked at data for both of these trip providers. And this question has actually since been answered. We do have data from SSTA, which we have mapped on the following slides. So we looked at trips going from Williston to other towns, as you can see on this map. which shows links between trip origins and destinations. A lot of the trips are going into Burlington, and some are going to destinations north and south of town. And on a typical weekday, between 10 and 20 trips originate in Williston. And then most of those trips have a return trip back into town. So most of the time, this is individuals who are traveling to Burlington for a specific need and then taking the same service back into town. We also wanted to look at trips within Williston on the existing demand response service. So in the 2-week period that we looked at, about 11% of trips both started and ended in town, which represented about 1 to 2 trips per day. So I think the point here is that as we're thinking about a microtransit service, which would provide local mobility in and around Williston, we don't think that that service would compete with the options that are currently available. Mainly because customers are currently using demand response services mainly for travel within town. So while it's possible that a microtransit service could absorb these 1 to 2 trips per day that are happening within the town, we really think that microtransit probably stands to generate some new ridership and appeal to a new customer base after it's introduced, rather than competing with this existing demand response service. So maybe before we get into the discussion, does anybody have any questions about any of the information we just presented, or perhaps comments or like additions to the information we provided based on your experience?
Yes, Jim McCullough here. So the question is, how are you considering the fact that more Williston residents work in Essex Junction, or in Essex, I think you may have said, than Burlington, and yet the headway for Essex busing is a fraction of what it is into Burlington, and that also tends to show that the ridership per vehicle mile is way down, which could falsely indicate, in the case of Essex, that that's not as optimal as a service, and yet it is down because of the headway, perhaps. Have you worked those thoughts into your analysis, or would you be doing that?
So maybe I can provide some initial thoughts here, and then also like ask Chris and Jamie from GMT a question. So I think in general, we find, so I guess first to introduce a concept with microtransit, which I'm not sure we've actually defined fully. So let me start by kind of defining what we think of as a microtransit service. So microtransit, in our view, is a demand response transportation option where customers are asked basically to book a trip by saying where they want to go from to, and then a system will then match them with a vehicle. And ideally, that system will aggregate customers traveling along a similar journey path. So it's basically a shared ride model. Typically, customers can book trips using either a mobile app or by calling a dispatch center where a reservationist would then schedule them a ride. This is similar to the model that we use with GMT in Montpelier. So that's kind of an overview of how microtransit functions. One type of trip that we often try to encourage on microtransit is what's known as a first last mile trip, where a customer would use microtransit for either the first or last mile of their journey, and then connect to a fixed route service that would take them basically to their end destination. So one of the trip types that we will be thinking a lot about in the context of this study are first and last mile trips where customers start in Williston outside of the fixed route network, but then take microtransit to access a fixed route. Jim, to your question, I think we often find that customers are more likely to use microtransit for a first last mile connection to routes that are more frequent. So one thought here is that by offering a microtransit service that could bring more customers to the fixed route, sometimes these services have the impact of increasing ridership on fixed routes. which could then serve as a justification for a transit agency to think about perhaps increasing service frequency on a certain route if they see that there is sufficient demand to support that kind of decision. So that's just to say that I think we're definitely thinking about these questions in the context of this study, but we'll need to go through our alternatives analysis to have, I guess, more specific ideas or recommendations about how the two services relate.
I think Jim, if I understood, you were saying that sorry if the information here is misleading, but actually you can see of Williston residents, the majority are going to Burlington or South Burlington. If you add up those two numbers, it's almost 2,000 versus only about 500 going up to Essex. And so you can kind of see that the bus running a lot more frequently into Burlington is supported by the data that there's a lot more travel between Burlington and Williston than there is to Essex. So I'm not sure if that was, maybe that was a little unclear the first time we presented it.
Can I jump in real quick, Carl?
Yeah.
I think if we advance one slide, it's the distribution of folks who are coming into work in Williston but live elsewhere, and that's where Essex is the highest.
Okay.
I think, Jim, that this was what you were referring to, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's certainly something that we will look at in the study. So there is that much higher or much shorter headway, I guess, between Williston and Burlington than Williston and Essex. And I think that might be something that we see when we get to the zone alternatives. We're sort of drawing those different shapes of where the service might go to. I think, the service to Burlington is good and it's frequent and it's going where people need to go. So I would be surprised if a lot of alternatives propose microtransit service going west to Burlington. I would be much less surprised based off, what we're seeing with Essex being a little bit less dense, the population being more spread out, and the bus being less frequent. I'd be less surprised if we see some alternatives that might go up in towards, north towards Essex a little bit. So absolutely something we'll be looking at later on in the study.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you for that great question. Any other questions on this before we start asking questions of this group? Great, okay. I think we can go ahead to our next slide. And maybe we can take these questions one by one, and I'll kind of leave the floor open rather than going around and calling on people. But so I think we're asking these questions because we're starting to think about the specific service alternatives that we'll model as a part of this study. So we're really hoping to get kind of initial feedback to shape what those alternatives will look like. So I think our first question is pretty high level, but we'd really like to hear if there are any specific communities we should be aware of who are likely to need or use public transit, whose needs we should really take into account with when considering alternatives. So I think we'll start there and kind of open that to the floor.
Well, Jim McCullough again. Waited a few seconds for someone else to go first this time. That said, yes, absolutely. The Williston Woods residential area totally off any bus service line now, and in Williston, that's in North Williston, off of the North Williston Road, and the other and there are a lot of elders in there, but they're not all elders are there. I'm sure SSTA goes there frequently, however. And in Williston Village, which now no longer has any bus service, Whitney Hill Homestead, another elder community that really should be served in perhaps this new on-demand model.
Thanks. I saw hands from Amy and then from Jen.
In addition to kind of what Jim just mentioned, I'm sure folks are aware to think of elderly and other populations who may not have access to a car. I just want to call your attention to young people who can't yet or choose not to drive. And I'm thinking, middle school and older, who might not be wanting, they might have jobs to commute to, but they might also just want to move around a little bit more independently. And it would save me a whole lot of trips as a parent to driving back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
That's actually
Environmentally speaking, not because that's a pain in the butt, but doing a lot of trips.
That's actually something we hear really frequently with these types of services. It's often parents will say, I'm really supportive of this service. I'm never going to use it myself, but this would be like life-changing for my my family and some people I know. And so I think that that's definitely a really common user base.
Jen?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention we relocated about 5 years ago from Williston. We're a 30-year resident, and my son had used the loop that went into the village, and now longer that it's not available to them. So I support what Jim stated too, and Amy, that's a very popular loop that would be very helpful in connecting him. Unfortunately, we do have a car, and therefore SSTA is not an option, but we'd handle all his transportation to get him where he needs to go, unless we can get him to the bus route, which sometimes is a little challenging. So I would just keep those with not only physical disabilities, but developmental disabilities in mind, because there are many that will not drive. And right now, it's just falling a lot on the parents, and not to say that we don't mind doing it, but if you see the amount of transportation we do for someone who's pretty social, it's important to keep that in mind. And I don't know, another consideration is when there is a stop, even if you hook up with GMTA, there are some locations where it's not convenient to cross the road there, for example, because there isn't a light there for those with disabilities to cross. And I know that's become a problem for us, and where we can get him to access off a bus sometimes to make sure he is safe. He knows the rules, but doesn't mean he always follows the rules. Thank you.
Are there specific intersections you have in mind that are like pedestrian danger points that we should be aware of?
He works right now for Special Olympics Vermont, which is, there is not a light at that intersection on Gregory Lane, but there's not sidewalks on the side there either. I know they just did a major transportation widen the road of Industrial Ave to Williston Road there, which I don't think would be a safe place to have him cross either. So I don't know how much further he'd have to go to find a light where he could then use the lights to cross. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's just one example.
That's definitely helpful. And thank you for that perspective. I think those are considerations we will certainly keep in mind. Any other thoughts on communities or areas that we should be thinking about as we start designing our alternatives? Okay, I'll move to the next question, but I should also say everyone in this group should feel free to email either myself or Melinda to provide thoughts that you have after this call, or at like any point in the study. We're definitely happy to take feedback in writing as well. And there will be other opportunities in this forum to share feedback too. But kind of our next question for this group. So we mentioned that a large part of the study will be community and stakeholder engagement. So we wanted to give a kind of high level question here, which is just if anyone has any advice for how we should approach engaging the public in Williston, that would be really helpful for us. I think in the past, we've really leaned on members of our stakeholder advisory committees to basically help us access either individuals who they work with directly, or just kind of shape how we approach the community in general. So I want to kind of open that to the floor if anybody has any thoughts on how we could successfully engage the public in Williston for this project.
Hey, Webb, in any of the other projects you've worked on in Vermont, have folks brought up Front Porch Forum?
I have not personally heard about Front Porch Forum.
Okay, so we have a statewide forum. It's broken down by individual communities and even in some areas, individual neighborhoods. And it's basically, you know, a daily email or every couple days email with lots of topics. It's really popular in Vermont. That's a really great way to engage folks. I know my 80-year-old father-in-law lives in Williston Village and he uses it all the time. So it's, you know, it's not just like folks who are young using technology, it's definitely reaching older folks as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful.
In terms of communicating with that group, do you have any recommendations on who we'd reach out to?
Yep, I can send you some information about how to reach out to Front Porch Forum. I know a lot of folks, probably a lot of community members and stakeholders in this group might have accounts with their individual organizations and, you know, probably lots of residents. So I'm sure between all of us, we can think of how to get either some paid advertising onto Front Porch Forum or some free messaging through other channels.
Awesome, thank you. And I think we will have, you know, later on in the project, some more specific requests for assistance with our community engagement, which might include emailing listservs. So when we get to that point, also please feel free to provide advice or like comments on how we're approaching it. But thanks, Jamie, for that info. And then I think our final question we were hoping to discuss today is just if there are any organizations or individuals we should try to contact through this project. Part of our project here is interviewing in a kind of more one-on-one setting, individuals and organizations who can really speak to the transportation needs in Williston. So people who we speak with could be members of this committee. We're happy to have additional conversations one-on-one or other organizations. So just wanted to ask that now as well. Yes, Amy.
I would maybe recommend Sustainable Williston, which is a group focused on more environmentally friendly items.
Thanks. And Kathy Ann?
I was thinking about, you know, reaching out to the people you wouldn't expect to reach out to. We have some large employers in Williston. There are schools. Vermont Tech has a campus. So thinking of those groups, I don't know where those students are coming from, but that parking lot is frequently very busy. Your larger employers like the grocery stores and the super stores and, you know, everything from Lowe's, you know, where are those employees coming from? So not just the people who are already very actively using public transportation, but also the people who don't know much about it, but that have, you know, where you could reach a big group of people in one small building.
Thank you. Jamie?
I know I mentioned this on one of our last calls, but there's certainly a community of businesses like Boyer Circle in that area who don't currently have access to transportation that have reached out to us to enhance public transportation in that area. So I can certainly look through our list of folks who've reached out about enhanced public transportation options in Williston. And they might be a really active group of folks who are just super motivated to have some transportation, and I can help with that.
Thanks. Yeah, that would be super helpful. And Melinda?
Yeah, this specifically related to the businesses in Williston, the employers. This could be an opportunity to interact or coordinate with the CATMA I can't remember, Matt, what's CATMA stand for? The Chittenden Area
Transportation Management Association.
Thank you, yes. Because they've been, they've reached out to us, wanting us to kind of work with them on outreaching to businesses around transportation demand management. So I think this is a good opportunity to start to do that work.
Thanks, Dan.
Yes.
Someone that came to my mind was developers. Any, especially developers that have like planned housing units, in Williston. Is there an opportunity to incorporate, maybe some transit infrastructure that would allow for microtransit to operate a little bit better? And so I'm thinking like curb stops, or cutouts, as well as maybe bus stops, that kind of thing. But anyway, just having a conversation with maybe a developer or two that are larger in Williston. And so that'd be something that I think Melinda and Matt might have a list for.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think would also be really interesting to us to think about kind of the physical infrastructure that can make these services better. Jim.
Yes, it would seem to be obvious, but our local newspaper, the Williston Observer, I think our schools, schools have great communication capabilities. If our schools can promote civic interaction through the children will get it to the parents. Our service organizations in Williston, such as the Rotary, and there may be several others. I don't know if the Lions are still active in Williston or not. Those are some additional thoughts.
Thank you. Great. Well, thanks everybody for that input. I think this was our list of questions for today, but while we're on together, is there anything that anyone from VIA or Williston would like to add?
I was just going to say, if folks have questions just about the general microtransit model, I know that people are always curious, like, what type of vehicles will it be? Do I have to book by an app? How long do I have to wait for a pickup? Like those kind of questions. Feel free to ask them now as well, because I know it's you probably have never used a service like this and you probably have some questions. Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, already then. Outside, very likely the scope of microtransit, but I believe intrinsically involved with the production of it. And we have a default, if you will, transit center in Williston. Green Mountain Transit goes to Walmart's parking lot, and then you split off from there for the junction, and the Link Express hopefully will be going to the new park and ride in Williston. Point being, we don't have an official transit center. And one of the findings, at least, of this organization could bemoan that fact and get our community on track. Help us get motivated to really do one, because we really do need a multimodal transit center.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that we have found that, especially as Webb was talking about for those first and last mile connections, like this microtransit service is not going to let you go all the way into Burlington, for example. And so you're going to have to be able to transfer from microtransit to those bus routes, and having a warm, clean, safe place to wait is very important. And so, yeah, we often call them like mobility hubs, transit centers, something like that. And so I think the study could kind of identify an obvious location for that, and whether that's like, it often is close to a Walmart or a shopping center or something like that. So I think that could definitely be one of the recommendations from the study. And you could start the microtransit service before that's constructed, of course, and then that could end up being something that kind of happens at a later date when the funding is available.
Oh, for sure. Good. Thank you.
Belinda, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that comment by Jim, and to say that the town planning department is actually working concurrently on a feasibility study for a multimodal hub on town property within Maple Tree Place. So that study is kind of chugging along, and we have a conceptual design at this point, and which looks really good, honestly. So we're hoping to, move that forward as we're able to, hopefully sooner rather than later. But just know that that is also in the works and something that's very much on our mind.
That's very exciting. And then on our end, that is definitely something we can incorporate into our modeling, where we'll expect that most of the transfers between microtransit and fixed route would happen at that location once the infrastructure is in place. Great. So I realize we're almost at time, but is there anything anybody else would like to add before we wrap up for today? Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for your time. Thanks for joining. We're looking forward to convening this group several times over the course of the study. And we will follow up over email after this meeting with our emails in case you'd like to provide any feedback or comments in writing. But if not, we're looking forward to speaking again when this group reconvenes. Thanks again, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.